Hello, once again I'm Cosmic, and welcome to the latest edition of the Risen franchise, Risen 3 Titan Lords. Risen 3 was developed by German developer Piranha, who are well known for their previous titles, including the Gothic franchise, as well as the previous two Risen titles. Published by Deep Silver, Risen 3 was touted to be a throwback to the original Risen title by once again boasting more open world and exploration based gameplay. Risen 3 takes a break from the unnamed hero of the first two games. Instead, you start the game as the son of the famous pirate Captain Steelbeard, thus being the brother to Patty, a familiar face from the last two games, who also features once again in this installment. Searching for the treasure on the mysterious Crab Coast, you soon come across a skull cave that has risen from the ground. Get it? Within the cave itself, a skull lord appears and steals the soul of the pirate who seemingly dies. Upon regaining his life thanks to the strange shaman doctor known as Bones, another typical cheesy Risen joke, the pirate begins a quest round the Southern Isles to reclaim his soul and ultimately stop this new threat. Moving away from the more linear and heavily pirate themed second installment, Risen 3 has gone back to the multi-factional open world style of the first. In Risen 3, you are able to travel throughout the Southern Isles to visit and explore islands such as Antigua, Tyrannus, Calidor, and other familiar places from the previous games. One thing I really do like so far is that exploration really does reap rewards, as you can find loot, quests, and secret areas in a variety of ways. One new gameplay feature in particular is the ability to swim. Now, while this does sound a little silly, it actually becomes a great exploration tool, as you can swim offshore to discover secret islands full of loot. One of the positive traits about Risen 3 in terms of travel is in its freeform design. You can just head off into a direction and explore, with the only thing stopping you in your tracks usually being enemies that you aren't ready for. Once you finish the starting sequence, you can go to any island that is available to you at that time. You don't have to do the islands in a specific sequence, which adds replayability, particularly when you take the factions into account. While on an island, you can travel on foot or fast travel to the various portals once they are activated. One useful mode of transport is a magic spell that transforms you into a flying parrot. While you can't stay in this mode for long, it's great if you've just travelled up a mountain and want a quick route down. It's especially useful for those of us with kleptomania, as parrot flight allows you to fly into locations otherwise inaccessible by foot. Now let's move on to combat. The game's combat has always been notoriously difficult throughout the series. One-click attacking combined with clunky movement can become very tedious and outright frustrating. The start of the game is particularly tedious, as your character has next to zero abilities other than basic attacks and basic melee blocking. It can end up meaning, for those who like to play on a harder difficulty, will spend hours upon frustrated hours dying against relatively minor enemies, especially in group situations. As you progress in the game, improving your stats and acquiring new abilities from trainers, combat becomes a hell of a lot easier. The combat system overall is massively improved from Risen 2, however it still suffers from fundamental flaws that have plagued the series since conception. Clunky movement, issues with focusing on enemies, and of course pistol shots missing from point blank range are all back once again. The major redeeming feature about combat this time round is the return of crystal magic. The developers took out magic in Risen 2, something which was largely complained about upon its release. Thankfully, magic is back in force this time, and I would argue it is the best way to deal with the majority of enemies, as not only does it pack a hell of a punch, but it's the less frustrating option for group encounters. Luckily, whichever faction you decide to join, all offer various forms of magical abilities, so no matter how you build your character, you will have some form of magic to fall back on. Those familiar with the previous titles won't find much different when it comes to character progression. To improve your character's array of stats, you must accumulate glory points. Glory is earned for the completion of quests as well as killing enemies. On top of this, to improve particular stats and gain new abilities, you must find trainers which are dotted throughout the world. However, to learn from trainers costs gold, and depending on what you are trying to learn, you must be prepared to part with a substantial amount. There are also special hidden items throughout the world which you can recover, which add a permanent boost to stats. These can be gained via either exploration or through the reading of books to acquire the specific quests. While character progression is solid, I've never liked the way the developers have insisted on putting trainers in the game. The main reason behind this is because you really need those abilities that they have to offer, and having to pay gold for them, especially early on when large amounts of gold is not easy to come by, is a massive frustration. One thing that annoys me even further is particularly when it comes to the sword fighting, if you're a melee focused character that is, the ability to riposte is essential and against some tougher enemies and a lifesaver when it comes to a group encounter. Yet even though you're playing as a pirate captain, you don't have this ability from the start. You must go find a trainer and then pay gold to get it, which is just ridiculous and makes no sense. Now, as I've mentioned, there are 3 factions in the game to which you can join only one. The 3 factions include the mages, demon hunters and a voodoo tribe. Each faction offers an array of faction specific abilities and quests. Once you join a faction, you're able to then gain better ranks within that faction, which unlocks better gear, quests and abilities. However, once you join a faction, you cannot join another, so choose carefully. Thanks to the freedom that the game allows you to travel, you can complete the majority of the quests on each faction's island before making your decision to which to join, so you can get a good feel of the factions. I ended up joining the Mages faction, known as the Guardians, for 1, the magical abilities obviously, and 2, for the really cool eyepiece. On top of the factions, you'll also have to go around and assemble your own crew for a ship. Right at the start of the game, you'll gain the companion known as Bones. You'll heavily rely on your companions in battle early on, as your character is crazily underpowered. You can have one companion with you at all times and change which one you want to use by returning to your ship. Companions have also their own stories and their own quests that you can do, which add some character to each and some backstory. As an avid RPG player myself, one thing I always look forward to is items and loot. Sadly, there's a massive lack of items for me in Risen 3. There's simply not enough different sets of armour and not enough weapon variety. While the game does have good crafting for potion brewers and spellcrafters, when it comes to blacksmithing there's simply no depth whatsoever, which was a real disappointment. Bar the faction specific sets of gear that you can only gain through joining them and climbing the ranks, there's just little to nothing of worth, which is just awful. One of the greatest things about RPGs is the ability to delve into an immersive world and create a unique character. Risen 3 sadly fails in this endeavour. Graphically, the game is good, but it's not great. On the PC specifically, I would have liked to see a lot higher texture resolutions and more options, as much of it looks very last generation console. The world, however, does look good and it looks immersive. There are some glitches and bugs to be found throughout, but these tend to be minor. Sadly, once again, Risen 3 follows suit in the terrible lip syncing animations, as well as poor facial animations as a whole. Similar to the previous games, the voice acting and scripting is just full of off-colour humour and outright cheese. Some of the voice acting isn't terrible, but some of it is cringeworthily bad. Risen 3's major redeeming quality is in the amount of content the game has. There are hundreds of quests to undertake and fantastic locales to explore. The factions offer a good amount of replayability as well as the sheer amount of quests. You'll undoubtedly find something on a second playthrough that you didn't in the first. Overall, those familiar with the Risen and Gothic series will be right at home with Risen 3. Any avid RPG player will be able to sink their teeth into Risen 3 and find a good amount of enjoyment from the content that it provides. However, I wonder if many people will not be able to get past the difficulty of the combat at the start. It does require a certain amount of perseverance that I think will send more casual players running for the hills. Risen 3 is certainly a large improvement on the second, and there's a good degree of enjoyable content in the game. At the end of the day, if you enjoy a decent RPG, then Risen 3 will be for you. However, those looking for a more streamlined RPG experience may wish to look to more mainstream titles. And that's Risen 3 Titan Lords. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Do like, subscribe and leave a comment, and I will see you next time.